GitHub Copilot is an AI assistant for developers that increases the average development by 25%. What is GitHub Copilot? GitHub Copilot is a plugin for especially Visual Studio Code. It's directly implemented in Visual Studio Code, so you can actually change your code and access everything. The other side, it is GitHub. So basically you have an environment where you can access it in GitHub itself. You can chat with it on GitHub and you can do code reviews. So this is how it looks like if you open Visual Studio Code. If you're familiar with ChatGPT, it's no big surprise. At the end of the day, it's a chat AI that you can give commands, you can talk to, you can ask questions, you can interact. It's an AI assistant, but directly in Visual Studio Code.
Hi, and welcome to the TD Meetup. My name is Alexander Richter. I'm a technical director for visual effects, animation, and games, and I worked at companies like WetaFX and Framestore on Avatar: The Way of Water and Monsters at Work.
Today, we want to talk about GitHub Copilot. And what about the idea if I tell you there is an AI assistant that can help you to create your code faster, cleaner, better, and maybe even more professional? And that is the thing that we want to look into today. What is GitHub Copilot? Where is useful? How useful is it actually? And where can we use it ourselves in our own environment? My name is Alexander Richter. I'm a technical director for visual effects, animation, and games. And I'm also a coach for job application interview and contract negotiation. And previously, I worked at WetaFX, Framestore, and Macrovision on Avatar: The Way of Water, Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings, and Monsters at Work. And I'm no stranger to working with pipelines, with Python code. That became an important part of my job. Obviously, I'm also training Python courses, Python for Maya, and so on. So for me, it was always important to find ways to optimize my workflow, to optimize my way. So I'm someone who on one side is a little bit hesitant of going into the buzzword of AI and just believing everything that's going on, especially with the big boost with ChatGPT. For me, it's always important to make sure that when you use a tool like AI, like ChatGPT, like GitHub Copilot, that is actually useful versus the promise. And then you spend endless amount of time trying to get things right versus just make it and then it works. For me, this was an interesting adventure to figure out what is GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot is an AI assistant for developers that increases the average development by 25%. This is my statement. This is what I want to show you today. How it does it, and if it does it, and where it does it. That's what we want to tackle. What is GitHub Copilot? GitHub Copilot is a plugin for especially Visual Studio Code. It's directly implemented in Visual Studio Code, so you can actually change your code and access everything. The other side, it is GitHub. So basically you have an environment where you can access it in GitHub itself. You can chat with it on GitHub and you can do code reviews. So this is how it looks like if you open Visual Studio Code and if you have GitHub Copilot open, there's a chat box. If you're familiar with ChatGPT, it's no big surprise. At the end of the day, it's a chat AI that you can give commands, you can talk to, you can ask questions, you can interact. It's an AI assistant, but directly in Visual Studio Code. So what does that mean in the result? In the result, it means if we compare ChatGPT, it's like we open a browser, we give it actions like asking to write code. Nowadays, it actually has a few UI updates like this, so it gives us a little bit more extra visual flair. But if you do that in Visual Studio Code, we actually have GitHub Copilot accessing our code, changing our code, writing the code inside the environment, which is obviously much more practical at the end of the day. So we can literally ask and communicate with GitHub Copilot, and it will either write new scripts, for example, hey, write us an image resizer tool, create this, create that, and it will write that as a file in our Visual Studio Code. Or we can do the same thing for current code. So we can tell it, look at following scripts, this, and this, like workspaces, working sets it's called, and then it will do the action that we want. For example, can you optimize this? I need a feature, there's a bug. And then basically what GitHub Copilot does, it accesses the code directly. There is no copy paste involved from a browser like in ChatGPT. and it changes it. And then you can decide, do you want to accept the changes? You will see them highlighted in red and blue, basically, the previous and the new one. You can decide which one you like, which one you don't like, and you can accept or not. And then you can prompt like you did with ChatGPT. It's basically ChatGPT for developers in Visual Studio Code, accessing directly your scripts, knowing about them, and so on. So what does that mean? What does Copilot can do actually? So on first one, it can generate code. That is similar to what we know already. It can refactor code. So it can take your code and rewrite it, change elements, whatever you say it to do. It understands code context. So basically every file that you have open or not, you can tell it to put into context. So it understands multiple files. You can tell it to know about the following files, and then it will understand and reuse them. So for example, if there's a function in one file and you want to write something in another, it will understand that this function exists and maybe will use it if necessary. It can do obviously troubleshooting. If you have a bug, GitHub Copilot can look for the bug and give you an option. It can teach you about things. I did this example where I transferred from Python 2 to Python 3. And then I asked it also to tell me what it does, where it does it, and what was the rule here. And so it explained to me, not only did my script convert from Python 2 to Python 3, I also learned what kind of elements are important here. And so in the future, when I code myself, I could learn from that. It can generate ideas, it can generate unit tests, and obviously documentation. Interesting about the whole AI and ChatGPT and Copilot, and we go a little bit of a step back after we understand what GitHub Copilot basically is the expectation with that. So if you think about a lot more and more people who try AI, who want to work with AI, like ChatGPT, like Midjourney, like GitHub Copilot, they expect that with the more use of AI, the faster everything goes. So if this is 100% here, 100% of the normal situation, you do it the classical way. In development, that means it's about your knowledge, it's about Googling, it's about forums, asking your colleagues, whatever you do. So in the classical way, zero AI, you would take 100% of the time to complete a task generally. That's how we did it before the last 10, 20 years. And that's how it took. And then basically there is this belief that the more AI integration you have, the less time you need it. You know, a little bit AI, 75% from the original time, 50%. And if you have a lot of AI inside your ChatGPTs and Midjourneys and Copilots, you cut the time in half, you cut the time in 75%, and you don't need to hire as many people, you don't need as much time, and so on and so forth. The reality of things is more like this. This is more how the reality of AI integration at the moment looks like. If we would integrate AI a little bit, but we are not trained in AI use, we don't really have a really good example. We just have a little bit ChatGPT or a little bit Midjourney here, or a little bit that, a little bit that. So to some degree, it can happen that this AI will speed up the process. You know, you use ChatGPT to find a bug, and it does. Fantastic. Instead of 1 hour, you spend 5 minutes. Great, moving on. But it can also happen that it takes longer for you to fix a bug or to do a feature because the AI is slow. It doesn't understand. It hallucinates and so on. So it can also mean we save time, like instead of 100% of the original time, 75%. Or it can mean we have 125%. It actually can take us longer with AI than without. Then there is this extreme. What happens if a producer or supervisor or lead suddenly decides, you know what? We should use a lot of AI constantly. Everything should be AI. We don't need as much programmers or TDs or whatever. We just use, ChatGPT, Copilot, whatever. And then we have this extreme. Sometimes it can pay off. Sometimes we have this, it's just 25% from the original time. So AI basically cut off 75% from a problem or a feature or something. Fantastic. We're like, wow, this is amazing. But sometimes because we rely so heavily on the AI, it can become a 200, 300, 400% increase in time, because what happens if it doesn't work? What happens if the AI hallucinates again? What happens if the AI doesn't do it as well as it should be, as good or in this direction? So suddenly we try a prompt and prompt and prompt and prompt, and we don't get to the results, maybe never. And that means we can be stuck in that. Not only that we take forever to create this with AI, maybe no one in the team is able to solve the problem anymore because the whole team, the whole project relies heavily on AI. So there's this two extremes. Where I'm currently focusing on basically is this. I suggest to find a way where we implement AI like GitHub Copilot, which is specifically for developer. And we find this middle ground between using still classic, we still Google, we still do all our things, but we use Copilot perfectly for our situation. So we are skilled developers. We still become knowledgeable about. We learn the basics of GitHub Copilot, of AI use, and so on. And we understand when to use it and when not to use it. So we understand the threshold when to use. So we never get over the 100% mark. If we use a certain amount of AI, we will always be either more or less the same as before, or let's say 25, 50%, sometimes better. So in this very loose way, depending on the situation. So we're not overusing, we're using it smartly. And I always describe the I use is like with Google. So it's Google 2.0. If you think about, if someone today will tell you, oh, you know what, I'm a developer, I don't Google. You would say, what? You don't Google? What do you do? Oh, I read books. I think about it and so on. And then you would say, yeah, that's a waste of time. Maybe you get to the solution, but if you don't Google, you have the whole library, forums, and so on. So you don't get to your solution as quickly. Who is Google? And I think that is where AI, especially things like Git Copilot, coming into. It's becoming the Google 2.0. I don't say it's the only solution. I don't say it's a replacement, but I say it is something that if you don't use it, especially with the following years, you lose a little bit of the speed that you need, At the same time, you don't want to become unskilled using it. So the idea is of something like Git Copilot to use it as what it is. It's an AI coding assistant. If you find a way to integrate it next to your Google, I think then you are pretty good. I use it to develop my open source pipeline Plex. I started to add custom features. For example, read and write a YAML file settings in an app. So I created an app and it should give me read and write elements so I can just change the table and then save that table back into the YAML file, for example. I asked it for code optimization. For example, simplify access to a singleton class, which is more complex because it was a very important class that I needed. Optimize certain functions, optimize structure, and obviously fixing bugs. I had, for example, some PySet integration issues and unclosed dependent events. So for example, I closed the app and it was still running and the whole event was not closing correctly. And I was like, hey, why? But because it was interconnected with multiple applications, it was hard to figure out. So I used the AI to help me, assist me in figuring this out. The other way where I learned more about Copilot is by creating the Python Copilot course. So what did I do there? For example, I compared the classic way, which means skills, Google, forums versus Copilot, for example, to fix a bug. And in my case, I had this bug, which took me 37 minutes, 28 seconds to solve by myself. It could have been 12 minutes, maybe on a good day, but it would definitely not be 3 minutes and 2 seconds, which took Copilot to solve. I asked one of my student testers for the course to do the same. And what came out, she, for example, took 45 minutes to solve it by herself, and it took her 5 minutes to solve it with Copilot. I'm currently still looking for more testers. I have some beta testers for my course to get even more data on this one. I did a few use cases. For example, converted Python 2 to Python 3. I created an operation application from scratch. It was an image resizer. You want maybe all your images in the folder down to HD from 2K or something like that without doing that manually, throwing it into Photoshop or whatever you use. I'm still working on creating an application in a DCC. I applied coding style and things. So everyone who is in my Python Advanced Masterclass knows that a very important part of coding is to write PEP 8 conform or coding style conform code. It's a key to become a good programmer in a team. And I asked Copilot to look at my code and improve it into coding style, which means it could not only save me time to do things, it could also teach me certain things that I didn't know. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that this is better. Okay, good to know. And I'm currently working on a third-party script. So one of my students gave me his application he wrote on a final application. The goal is to use Copilot to understand the script and add a new feature to a script that I have no idea about, using it as an assistant to guide me through all these elements. My idea of this whole presentation, obviously, besides showing you what GitHub Copilot is to also show you it as an opportunity. I don't say it will be the solution for everything, but I believe a skillful developer trained in AI use can integrate it as a part of their key resources and increase their productivity by around 25%. Sometimes more, sometimes less. So the important elements of a good developer are knowledge and skills, Google, forums and communities, asking colleagues, and I believe GitHub Copilot, or in the future, maybe even other AIs. I believe it's becoming a part and assistant. It's not a replacement, but it's something where we need to figure out how much we can use it so we don't overuse it and stuck to it, and we don't underuse it and we miss out on something like, Google 2.0 to some degree. The final things that I want to address is a few questions that I believe maybe you have. Do you recommend GitHub Copilot? Yes, I tested it for 6 months and created a Python Copilot course for it, so I understand the basics. It's not perfect. It has its weakness points. It has its limits. But compared to something like ChatGPT, because it's so focused on something very specific and not the whole everything, basically, I felt it was a little bit more on the assistant side and actually working. Will GitHub Copilot replace developers? No, it's built as an assistant and it relies heavily on your output. Basically, if you are not a good programmer, GitHub Copilot will also not be as good. It will maybe boost you a little bit, but you cannot work with it if you don't know what you're doing, basically. It will only come to a limit. And also there is always the negative side. If you work too much with AI, you rely so heavily on them that when they don't work, you become a little bit like, oh, I don't know what to do because normally the AI tool tells me what to do. So you still need to be a good developer. You still need to be a good programmer. But using something like GitHub Copilot is like having an assistant next to you that you can ask questions, talk to, brainstorm ideas, and so on. Can an amateur become a pro user using Copilot? Absolutely no. It can boost occasionally your performance, but a lack of skill results in a lack of results. So you cannot just say, hey, I'm a bad programmer or I have no idea. Let me just ChatGPT it or GitHub Copilot. Yes, occasionally you will get to your solution. That's totally fine. But when it comes to deeper things, and I mean when it comes to not just this like 50-line tool, when it comes to a more complex tool, when it comes to project tools, production tools, pipeline tools, that's when there will be limits how much you can do. Because there's also certain ways the AI wants to go that is maybe not good for you, not good for the project, and not good for the pipeline. Is GitHub Copilot better for devs as ChatGPT? Absolutely. The best thing about it is it actually uses the GPT model. So at GitHub Copilot, one of the benefits is you can pick at the moment between 2 big models, Claude and GPT. So ChatGPT is actually part of it, but you have 2 different models and they are different. For example, the benefit of Claude versus GPT is Claude is better in explaining and communication. So if you are on an educational part, if you want to learn about something, Claude is much better. It will explain it in a better way. It's a much better educator, where GPT maybe sometimes is a little bit better on harder problems. But you have 2 models. So you don't stuck with one model like ChatGPT, you actually have 2 different ones. So it allows you to not only pick models, it allows you also to directly influence your code. So you don't have to copy paste your code, throw it somewhere. You just say, hey, GitHub Copilot, take this script and do this for me. And so it's much, much better. Best way to use GitHub Copilot is a coding assistant. I find it's nice for final stages. That's something where I definitely think it's good. And I think that is also where things like ChatGPT also a little bit more shining is, hey, I'm finished. Give me a review. Optimize this, fix my coding stuff. Sometimes nice for fixing bugs, where I sometimes feel like if you start to get to this ceiling, something like GitHub Copilot can help you to fix it faster. Learning is very nice because it can explain to you things, and you can sometimes feel like you are working with someone else, which is super nice. So you don't feel completely alone when coding. How much does Copilot increase productivity? I noticed certain things where if you would standardize the whole environment. So sometimes it can be, as I said before, from 37 minutes to 3 minutes. Crazy number. Sometimes I had a situation when it becomes more complex. It took me the same time. It took me the same time to do it myself and the same time to do it with Copilot. Prompt. So it balances itself out. To get to 25%, you understand Git Copilot and you use it correctly, and you stopped using it when it's not delivering on the promise, basically. How much does GitHub Copilot cost? If you are on GitHub, costs you $0. You can get the normal version for $10 a month. ChatGPT is $0 to $20. So here's the current plan. This can change. We'll see about that. Can you learn to become more efficient with Copilot? Yes. The key is to learn how to use it, basically, the basic things that you know, all the prompts, and when to use it while knowing its strengths and weaknesses, and also a little bit the understanding between the different models, between Claude and GPT, because they have different strengths, but it allows you to, if one is not going, you can always try the other. And one of the things I recommend is obviously joining my Python Copilot course. So I was working on this course, and I was also wondering while I was working on how much will this help? Because I believe on one side, I don't want to follow the AI trend just because it is a trend, because I believe we should always do things that are practical and useful. We should not just use something because people tell us to use it because there's a nice trailer or something like that. So for me, it was important to, when I make this course or when I recommend GitHub Copilot and when I explain it, is it actually practically useful? And what I would say, yes, but you need to understand how to use it correctly. You need to integrate it into your daily routine, which doesn't mean you will use it 24/7. I don't recommend to do it, but it's something that you reach out. As much as you code and suddenly open Google and search for something, this is now an alternative. Like sometimes you go into Google, sometimes you go into GitHub Copilot. And that is the level that I believe it's an alternative to Google that gives you a different perspective, different solutions, and different strengths, basically. And that's where I believe that it currently is. And it will get better over time. And I still recommend you to learn and become a great developer. I still recommend you to do courses, to learn from others, and so on. It's not a replacement. I highly say that, because you should not rely on it as the tool for everything and so on. If you are a bad coder, Git Copilot will not save you from that. But if you are a good coder or you are learning and you are on a certain level, I would not recommend it for beginners. Like zero beginners, not recommended, because you need to learn the basics. But for someone who starts at a certain level, as intermediate level, advanced level, highly recommended as a part of your workflow. Maybe once or twice per day, depending on your workflow, and it will save you a bunch of time if you use it right. And that's what the things that we focus on. We look at GitHub Copilot. I explain it in more depth. We look at examples. We see the benefits. I explain what you can do to optimize it, and so on and so forth. And that is the Python Copilot. If you're interested, you're welcome to join it. It will be super cheap for now, for this current time. So just 95 euros, because I want to give everyone the opportunity to try it out and see if this is something that is interesting for you. Because at the end of the day, I believe this is something helpful. Use something as much as it's practical, not because it sounds cool or whatever. We always have to judge things like Copilot, ChatGPT, Midjourney in the final results of, hey, I did that. Can I actually use it? Or is it just, nah, whatever. I wanted you to understand what GitHub Copilot actually is. And I also wanted you to understand where I see it being as an AI assistant that can help you. But it's not the silver bullet. It is something I believe starts to creep into typical development. But as much as it is becoming more and more important, it's also important for good developers to use it appropriately. So you don't overuse it. You don't become reliant on it. You don't become, too heavily on this whole AI trip and basically destroy your own production because it maybe doesn't do after a while what you want to do. And at the same time, you still use it as something that can assist you, can help you to do things better and faster and more appropriate and production ready. I'm happy to hear from you. So do you have any experience from GitHub Copilot? Do you have any questions regarding everything I just said?
How is it for pipelines? I'm going from literally ground up. So from pipelines to implementation during production.
I tested it on pipeline. This is actually a full week in my course where I went into, it's a 2-hour actually thing where I did it twice. So one time I was a little bit unsure about what I want to do. And I tried with Copilot to figure it out, what I want to do and how to do it. And the second time I did it with, I know exactly what I want to do. And I used Copilot to, do things faster. It was a big difference. Like if I don't know what I'm doing, it took me around the same time if I did it manually versus with Copilot. And if I know what I'm doing, there was a limit how far I can get until I have to take over and fix the rest, because it started to hallucinate, which means it cycled around and around. And like basically I got 70% in a minute or 2 minutes. And then suddenly I get nowhere. Literally, it was telling me I'm doing what you're saying to me, and then it changed one line of code or something.
So you got to prevent a loop.
I learned that it's called hallucination. So I love this word. So yeah, basically what it does and what it believes it does, it's not the same basically. What I would say in terms of that, since I'm also working on a pipeline course for the summer, I will create a course for how to write pipelines, and I use this for my Plex pipeline. It can support you on writing pipeline tools. I would not use it to write a pipeline from scratch.
Okay.
It will understand context. So you can give it different scripts and tools, and it will, like, for example, you tell it like, oh, integrate a YAML file here. And if you give it a script where there's a function to get YAML files or save YAML files, in most cases, it will understand that and it will use this function actually. It's understand context. If you give it the right files, there's a good chance it will actually use things like you would, but there is a certain level of supervision and understanding. So if you don't understand how to make pipelines, I think you will fail using AI at the end of the day, because it will go in a certain direction or it will become multiple things, and it will not be a coherent pipeline at the moment, you know.
How comfortable I need to be with Python to start use something like Copilot or ChatGPT, or because right now I'm on Python DCC course, and I don't feel comfortable yet to use something like that. But I want to know when I am allowed to use some tools like that.
Yeah, so we have a few chains in our Python masterclasses. Recently, I said no Googling until week 6, but now I'm also saying no AI tool until finished. I cannot put as many exclamation marks behind that as possible. If you are a Python coding beginner, don't use AI. And there's a very simple reason that happens even to the experienced people. Experienced people have the same problem. If you overuse AI, it's the same thing like you overuse Google and forums, like copy pasting from Stack Overflow, constantly copy pasting from forums. You don't learn anything from it. It will do the job for you. If you rely too much on someone does the job for you, like your colleague fixing your problems every time, you become a bad programmer. The level of use of AI is the more you are an expert, the more you should use it. The more you're a beginner, the less you should use it. As a beginner, you should use it even more for teaching versus fix this for me. So as a beginner, don't do fix this for me. As a beginner, do I don't understand, or can you optimize this and maybe explain why? Perfect. It's literally like a mentor that helps you to become better. But don't be, I'm too lazy to do this. That Copilot fix my problems. And if you do that, it will, on a short term, make you faster, 100%. But on the long term, you will pay the price of becoming a shitty programmer. You will become heavily reliant on it. And if it doesn't work, which it will not, there will be times it will absolutely not work or stop at a certain point. Then you are just, I don't know what to do. And if you experience this with Googling, you know what I'm talking about. If you ever copied code from online and you throw it into, and it works and you don't know why, it doesn't work and you don't know why. That is the situation that you can experience. The problem is with Google, you maybe have a certain elements. Imagine you are addicted to using AI every day. So you rely on it heavily. So you become a bad programmer who's just basically a supervisor for an AI coding tool. Avoid that. So my recommendation, before you finish the course, absolutely no AI at all. And after, start with, it's a teacher. It's literally a Google, like helps you to explain, oh, why is it that? Oh, good. Can you explain that? Okay, I wrote the code. I don't know how I can improve it. Hey, Copilot, how would you optimize this? And then you judge it. Like you literally think, is this actually better? Never take AI for granted. It's not an expert. Sometimes it's really dumb. But at the same time, I believe it is something you should use the more you become comfortable in. So it is an intermediate tool. at the end of the day. It's not a beginner tool. No AI tool should be used on a beginner level. And I mean that for everything. Midjourney. You should not use Midjourney if you are a beginning artist, designer, whatever. No. But you can use it to create your drafts and to get ideas and, it's better. Or maybe you create something in Overpaint just because that's how you do it. Fine. If that's okay for you, whatever. Use AI sparingly, but use it as an assistant. But be aware that it can take away from your skills very fast. And as a beginner, this is a high price to pay.
Alexander, okay, great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
I'm using a Cloudy as well for my assistants, and it's a very correct on your presentation. It's like as an assistant, it will be what you call like leveraging your code. So I did exactly as you said. Like after I finished my tools, and then for example, I just asked Cloudy to please check my code if there is some optimization for like using Walrus Walrus operators in recent Python. It analyzes the code and then give suggestions. So it's a very fun learning experience while using AI to help you. Like you have someone to refer to what else can you do best for your code, something like that. So
yeah, and it's a little bit like the break glass on emergency situation. I feel like this is also something where imagine you literally don't know what to do. You literally tried everything. You Googled, you whatever. I don't say it will always help, but sometimes it does. And so literally you tried your best. You don't know why. You Googled, you tried, you asked, you looked at forums, you whatever. You spent like an hour, half an hour, even more on trying to solve it, and you just don't know. You're like, okay, break glass for AI emergency, and let's see. Again, maybe it will not, but maybe it will. And that is already, imagine, that is something that literally changes your productivity from, I probably need another day to, hey, I found it out, to there's a chance I find it in 5 minutes. If you rely too heavily on that, there is a point where, you become a bad programmer. And then you become this kind of a thing. And so I think the best way how to see AI is literally another person. So this person can be wrong. This person can be worse, but this person can be better. And at the same time, you don't want to bother this person constantly. You want to bother them when you need them. And you want to also take their input seriously. Oh yeah, thank you, accept, save, works, move on. No, accept, look at the code, looks fine. Accept, test it, look at it, understand it, move on. Never just accept, save, move on. Or testing a little bit or whatever, just to make sure it's still working. Because if you do that, you become so reliant on that you will become worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Same thing for optimization. If you do that, like, oh, I write something, it works, let's AI fix everything, like the coding style, the 200 loops, whatever, AI will make it 5. That is also not what you want. It is this like 25% faster, the 25% better, the 25%. That's why I'm talking about the 25%. It's not this, I'm constantly relying it until it breaks and then I do it myself. Because if you constantly rely on it and it breaks, you probably will not be able to solve it yourself.
True.
So that is something that we want to avoid. The best current situation, it's an educational tool. Hey, can you explain this to me? I don't understand. And the best other way is code review. You finished, you are satisfied, and you're wondering, is there a better way to do better code and to do better style, better naming and so on and so forth. And then there's someone giving you a code review before you hand it out maybe to your team. You do a preview pass before you give it to other people, and you can be a little bit more secure about what you did and so on. And especially if after you have this review by the AI, you learn from it and you're like, okay, I try to remember that for my next time. And you do it better, that's the perfect solution. So the biggest danger with AI is to not use it and to overuse it. It's actually both, because if you're not using it, it's what I said, it's like not using Google in 2025. It's like, are you wasting your time of opening books? Who does that anymore? I'm pretty sure there's people who are not using Google as developer. You would never take anyone seriously who is a high level developer in Maya or Houdini, and they're not using Google. It's like, what are you doing? Like, how do you even get your information? Same thing with AI. But at the same time, it's neither is it good enough, nor should we use it to replace ourselves, because at the end of the day, there is a certain level where threshold where it will not, and there is a threshold where we get so used to it that if it goes down, like recently ChatGPT went down, we basically are lost. And everyone knows this when you have no internet as a developer. That is like the same situation. You try to code something and you have no internet. It's often the nightmare of every modern developer, basically. That's the next level, basically.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. The idea of the TD Meetup is to bring technology to visual effects, animation, and games. And it is not always the mind-bending, mid-journey, AI explosion, machine learning, whatever. It's sometimes like, hey, there's a small plugin that you can use. Hey, there's a small thing that you can use. Hey, did you check out this software? Hey, did you check out this workflow? And so that is the idea of the TD Meetup, is to bring technology to artists, to technical director, and software developer, so you become better in your job, you become more interesting to hire you. And again, it's not about using AI for AI purpose. It's using AI to be a better programmer, be a better pipeline developer, be a better technical director. That's it. It's just doing a better and faster job. It's not about, hey, I'm using AI, that's super cool and whatever. It's about, hey, I use sometimes Copilot to help me solve my problems faster and learn faster and become better at my job. So that is the main idea. And I think for how it is integrated, it is literally in Visual Studio Code. So if you use Visual Studio Code, it is literally in there. So you can just try it out, see how it works, and then after some experience, and if you join, for example, my course, you just understand where it can really help you and where you just, you know what, I'm doing it myself. This is a job for me, basically. And that is the main idea. So if you're interested in future TD meetups, we will have next month on March, we will talk about pipeline, as we had just a pipeline question. So I will introduce my open source pipeline Plex. I will show you what it is, what is included, so you will understand a little bit more about Plex, especially if you're interested maybe to use it for yourself or your team, or you're interested in learning how to work with pipelines. You can subscribe to my newsletter, then you get a notification about the next TD meetup. And the next one is in April about DeepSeek, so the big hot thing from China, the 6 million gum and some string attached kind of AI that is coming out of nowhere. Same thing as with Git Copilot. It's interesting for me to understand what it is not, and to figure out, is it actually something that is the interesting part of, hey, not only is it ChatGPT, but it's ChatGPT that you can have locally on your machine, not on the internet, not on anything else. If that's true, that would be cool. You know, you can literally create your own Copilot. Is it that? Or is that just, facade, smoke and mirrors, whatever? That's something that we want to find out as well. So make sure to subscribe here. GitHub Copilot, the course where I explain how this works. I show you different examples, show you the strengths, the weaknesses, how to use it, when not to use it, when stop to using it. I also compare GPT versus Claude, so you understand the models a little bit better, and so on and so forth. We're talking generally about AI and their use. Thank you very much for everyone joining. I hope you enjoyed our TD meetup of GitHub Copilot. You at least consider to use it, or you say absolutely not. I'm staying rather in the past. I'm Googling my way to everything. The best people in the future are the ones who are skeptical to everything new, but open to real practical help.
I welcome you to join us live and also watch the previous episodes, and I'll see you on our next TD meetup.